Hello and welcome to our first in our Community Heart and Soul Workshop series. We're so glad you're here today. And first, let me introduce myself. I'm Leanne Tingay. I'm a senior associate with Community Heart and Soul.
And I'm Jane LaFleur, a senior director at Community Heart and Soul.
We're so glad you're here. Let's just get started now. We're going to kick things off with a few words and remarks from our executive director, Mark Sherman. Mark?
Thanks, Leanne. Hello and welcome to the Community Heart and Soul virtual workshop series. My name is Mark Sherman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Community Heart and Soul organization. We're very pleased to have you join us today and appreciate your interest in learning about our program. At its core, Community Heart and Soul is a bottom-up, resident-driven program that helps people shape the future of their communities by actively seeking the collective wisdom of all residents based on a simple premise: what matters most in their communities. Our proven field-tested methodology has been used to revitalize almost 100 towns and small cities across the country, from Maine to Washington State, and our goal is to bring Community Heart and Soul to hundreds of additional communities. During today's session, you'll hear examples of how towns and small cities across America have benefited, both socially and economically, by going through the Community Heart and Soul process. You'll also learn about the unique ways in which we engage as many residents as possible by going to where they are rather than having them come to us. This includes using tools like Zoom to connect virtually, just as we are at this very moment. Towns and small cities are demonstrating resiliency by applying the training they learned through Community Heart and Soul during times of crisis, including COVID-19. An example of this involves the town of Hamilton, New Jersey, which created a Corona task force to help the town cope with the effects of the virus. They credit their participation in Heart and Soul with helping community leaders mobilize rapidly to actively engage all facets of the community, including government, service providers, and cultural groups. Heart and Soul towns across the United States are finding creative ways to persevere in their community engagement efforts. People are safely getting together in neighborhood backyards, at the end of driveways, in parks, and online to hear from each other, to connect, and to plan for the future. Not only are they continuing to move forward, but in many cases they've been helping to coordinate communications out to the community on COVID response in their town. As you learn about the many social and economic benefits of Community Heart and Soul, I encourage you to think about how your town or small city can become part of the growing family of Heart and Soul communities. And please do not hesitate to reach out to us directly following today's presentation with any questions or to learn how we can help bring Heart and Soul to your community. Now we'd like to share a brief video that features our founder, Lyman Orton, on the history and vision behind Community Heart and Soul. Thank you.
Community Heart and Soul is a field-tested planning method for small cities, towns, and rural communities, based on three powerful principles: involve everyone, focus on what matters, and play the long game. Developed by the Orton Family Foundation, Community Heart and Soul helps towns move toward a brighter, more prosperous future, rooted in what matters most to the people who live there. The seed for Heart and Soul was planted by businessman Lyman Orton, who with his three sons is proprietor of the Vermont Country Store. Orton served on his town's planning commission when it was wrestling with divisive development proposals. Orton grew frustrated that decisions being made that would shape the town's future were without guidance from the majority of the residents. There had to be a better way.
We call it Community Heart and Soul, guided by what matters most. What matters most to whom? To the residents, to the way people live their lives.
If our conversations focused on what matters most to our communities, then what conclusions would we come to about our towns, economic development, and the future of this area? Any community can just stumble into the future. We have a real opportunity here to seek out and grow in a way that reflects the whole community's values and ideas.
Almost any small town would benefit from going through a Community Heart and Soul process because it brings the residents of the community closer together. And as they get closer together, the differences tend to fade away, and the things that they care about the most, the things that matter most, replace the differences. They become more trusted in one another. They become more collaborative in their decision making and in their discussions about their community, and they become stronger believers in their community. So people will continue to live there, new people will move in, and people will invest more in their community.
I always love that video. So inspired by Lyman Orton. All right, your town. It's more than just a dot on a map. It's where you live. It's your home. What makes it special? Maybe not to anybody else, but what makes it special to you? Is it the people? Is it places? Is it the land around it, whether it's mountains or a river or lake in the desert? Those things, those special things that make your town special to you is what's behind Community Heart and Soul. We explore that, and you explore it with the entire community. Now, Heart and Soul, well, I always look at it and say it is a catalyst for positive change. Now, this is Galesburg, Illinois. And how many times, this happened a lot in Galesburg, maybe it happens in your community. Somebody might ask, what's there to do? And the response is, there's nothing to do in this town. Well, Galesburg put that to the test. And this is something you could do as well. You just put a chalkboard up in the middle of town and ask people to write down what's fun and free to do in Galesburg. And they came up with over 100 suggestions, as you can see on that board. Well, what their Heart and Soul team did, we'll talk about that later, Heart and Soul team did is they took all of those suggestions and they put it on a card and they distributed them all over town. The Chamber of Commerce had them, grocery stores had them. They did it as bag stuffers in people's groceries as they were leaving. The banks had them. Everyone did, because when somebody wanted to know what's there to do in Galesburg, they had it right there. They wanted to show all these wonderful things that was positive about their community. And when people would read them, they would realize, yeah, Galesburg is a special place. It is a good place. And it's where we call home. That's the catalyst for positive change. Now, how do you currently do business in your town? All right, maybe there's a project, something like a piece of land that needs to get redeveloped, or maybe there is an old building, maybe there's just open land. You're not quite sure what is the direction of your community. Well, almost every town also has their favorite little collection of town plans, studies, proposals for change in their community, and they sit on a shelf, and unfortunately, they never get implemented. I have gone into town offices, and I challenge you to do it too. There may be a few planners out there that's the back of the desk where they're sitting is that shelf with those plans. Take them down. Take a look at them. I think you'll find that a lot of them are still really good plans. They may have been done 20 years ago, but they're still valid. They're still good. And ask yourself why. And my response is this, and you'll hear me say it often throughout this presentation, because nobody owned it. Well, maybe a couple people did. The person that wanted the study done and the consultant that did a really good job because it is their job and they got paid. But nobody else in the community owned it. And the more you touch it, the more you're going to own it. So, what happens next? Let's say you've got that proposal, you've got that idea. You might put a public notice in the newspaper, and then that warns for a public meeting. Oh boy. And you hope that people show up to the meeting. And, I think we've all going to agree that 3 minutes at the microphone is not public engagement. It's not robust. And in fact, sometimes these kinds of meetings can become more divisive than they ever do in solving a problem. Remember, I was at a city council meeting where they had raised taxes and reduced benefits, and trust me, there was nothing but happy people in that one. I think some of you who, maybe your job or maybe part of your job to go to these kinds of meetings would absolutely agree. You've probably had the same type of experience. So I've got a question for you. Just think about this. The last time you were at a public meeting, who was missing? Who else should have been there? I have a colleague that said she was at a school board meeting and it was 9 o'clock at night. Well, it's pretty late for a school board meeting anyway, but somebody stands up and was very angry. Why are there not more parents here? Where are the parents? We're talking about their children, our students. And she thought to herself, it's 9 o'clock. The parents are probably home with their children. So think about this. Maybe write it down on a piece of paper. Who should have been there? Was it youth? Was it disabled? Was it different people within the community? Maybe why they're not there is access to public transportation or even understanding what the process is. So all of that together can create a missing or a hidden voice within your community. Now, instead of the arguing, instead of that 3 minutes at the microphone, what if public engagement looked more like this? Where people were engaged, where they found something kind of fun about public engagement, and that it was reaching out to everyone in their community, from the very young to the very old. That it didn't matter what your income was, your age, your education level, that every voice mattered. And we talked about what mattered most in our community. That's what Community Heart and Soul is all about. Now, Community Heart and Soul, as you heard in the video, was founded on 3 basic principles. Involve everyone, focus on what matters most, and play the long game. Let's talk about them. First of all, involve everyone. What do we mean by that? Well, we want you to take a look at your community, and we want you to look at all the different segments that are in your community. This is a great example. This is the Heart and Soul team in Upper Chichester, Pennsylvania. And as you can see, their team is made up of the very young up to seniors. You've got youth, you have people of color, different races, different nationalities, different religions, all together in the same place, focusing on what they want to see happen in their community. That's involving everyone. Our next principle is focus on what matters most. Now, this is Galesburg, Illinois again. And as you can see, some of the things that mean so very much to them is their history and their heritage, the accessibility to all the great things that they have there in Galesburg, and that it's a welcoming community. That's just 3 of many of the things that they focused on. Well, this helps you to say, all right, what are the things that are going to bring us together? What are the things that are going to unite us? Because we as a community have come together and said, yeah, these are the things that we love, that we treasure, we cherish, and do no harm to them. And let's build on those things for our future. And finally, the 3rd principle, play the long game. Now, what we mean by that is this isn't a flash in the pan. We want you to adopt the practice of Community Heart and Soul. That this is something for you, for your children, for your grandchildren. We're changing the way that we're doing business in our community. And we're going to involve everyone. We're going to teach everyone how we get the ideas out there, how we move forward with projects, and that all voices do count. All right, Heart and Soul itself. Well, it's made up of 4 phases. Imagine, connect, plan, and act. Let's go through them briefly. All right, phase 1, imagine. Just imagine. Imagine what success would look like in your community if you had proper engagement with people, and not just a few, and not just coming to the meeting. It's basically who is at the table, but more so, where do we take the table so that more people can be around it, right? Well, it's also saying if we're going to do that, if we're going to engage with all these different populations in our community, well, we've got to map it out. We have to think about how we engage with them. We even have to figure out how we communicate with everybody. That's phase one. Now, how do you figure out who's in your community? We use a tool called a community network analysis. Now, for those planners out there, this is not the same thing as a stakeholder analysis. It's a little different. This is really reaching out and saying, all right, let's break out the community into various networks and segments, and everyone has it. It's looking around your community. I don't care how small you are or how large you are, you have these various networks. May not be the same as you see up here, but it's probably schools or education, probably government. It may be civic and service groups. It could be a lot of different things. But then once you've figured out all the networks within your community, what are the organizations, both formal and informal, that may be part of it? So let's use this as an example. Maybe it's civic and service clubs. So maybe you have a Rotary and a Kiwanis and what I very lovingly call all the animal clubs, the moose, the elks, the lions, the eagles. But I'll bet you also have some informal groups. Makes me think of a group of women out in Colorado. They called themselves Women in Saddles. And it first started as a bunch of ladies that like to get together and go riding. Well, while they went riding, they talked about their community and what things they would like to do and what things they would like to make changes about. Well, one of the things happened to be that they really wanted to introduce children, and especially children with physical challenges, to riding. Because if you can't really use your legs very well or not at all, riding can give you a great sense of freedom, but they needed special saddles. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that story in just a little bit. But that's an example of an informal group that's also doing action. And I'll bet you have those in your community as well. So you start to map them out. Now, if you want to learn more about this particular exercise, we're going to be doing another workshop, and we're going to be doing it on this topic. It's going to be on October the 13th at 1 p.m. So please come and join us then for Who Lives, Works, and Plays. But we hope you're going to join us for our whole workshop series. So, all right. This is an actual community network analysis. This is in Meadville, Pennsylvania, and it was actually at Allegheny College, and they had one of those lab rooms where they had nothing but white walls all over all the walls in the room. And they were actually mapping out how their different organizations connect with each other. And as you can see, you see all those lines? Well, what I would also suggest is you put a person. Who is it that can connect those two groups? And maybe that's a person we need to talk to and get them involved with Heart and Soul, or at least get them to help us in engaging with different groups, educate us, maybe help us find people that is going to be more trusted to get in and talk to a group, because not everybody is going to be able to talk equally and in a trusting manner to everyone. I loved that I was there that day when they were doing this, and a woman from the hospital looked at this and said, "This is beautiful. Can I use this in my work at the hospital?" And I said, "Well, of course. This is Heart and Soul. It's for everyone in the community." Well, she took this information and she said, "Yes, because all these different connectors are showing me how do I get to all these different populations in our community, including the most vulnerable, so that we can educate them on our wellness programs, our nutrition programs, the WIC program, all of these things that the hospital offers for the community." And they're doing it in a grassroots, not a top-down manner. So it's a way of changing, that catalyst for positive change. All right, so now we've done some of this work in phase one. It's laying the groundwork. It's getting the systems in place. Now phase two. Once we figured out how all these different groups, how do we connect with them? That's phase two, connect. And you can do it in a variety of different ways. But it's going to be through a method of storytelling. Now, why stories? Well, if you've got a good story, there's really nothing more powerful. It's hearing from someone's voice in a very honest way. And when you share those stories, it's amazing what happens. The pride goes up in your community. You start seeing new leaders emerge. People have a more trusted feeling with each other because it's resident to resident. So that's some of the secret in the sauce. So you can do it in a variety of different ways. You can do it one-on-one, you can do it in circles, and you can even take techniques where you're just getting a thin amount of information. So, for example, in the North Fork Valley in Colorado, they were trying to reach a particular population. It was 20 somethings. And if any of you have done any kind of engagement work, you know that that can be a very elusive group to try to get in touch with and get to engage. Well, there was a microbrew. And the gentleman who owned the microbrew, his last name was Lovett. And he was introducing a new beer. He was calling it Love It or Leave It. And the Heart and Soul team thought this is perfect. What a great opportunity. And they created something very simple, a drink coaster. It's just one of those cardboard things, nothing fancy. On the front of it, they had the Heart and Soul Project there. What do you love about the North Fork Valley? And what would you leave? Write your answer on the back. And people did. And not only did they put it up on the corkboard, as you can see. They talked about things that they loved as far as the scenery and the people and the peaceful valley that it was, even the music, even the beer. They loved so much. What did they want to leave? Well, we call that hopes and concerns. And that's information that you need to know as well. And in fact, that's what this is all about. We call it story gathering, story listening, and story sharing. Story gathering is just like this. It's gathering all kinds of information. In Ambridge, Pennsylvania, they still are doing it even today, despite the pandemic. And there's ways that you can do it and do it safely. Now, I don't like the phrase social distancing and social isolating because I think more than ever we need to socially connect, but we do need to stay safe. So I call it physical distancing. And in Ambridge, they took this as a project and they brought it to the various parks that they had in their community. And basically, they were creating these flags and they were putting it out there asking people to say, all right, what do you want for Ambridge? What's your hope for the future for our town? And as you can see in the one photograph, they had pens that were all sanitized and they had a cup with those in there. And then a cup where people were to then, once they've used it, put it into the other cup so that they can get resanitized. Keep people safe. And they asked people to physically distance and wear their masks. And they wrote all kinds of wonderful things. And it got people talking. And it got the buzz going in Ambridge. And this is also what we look at is sharing those stories and gathering those stories. And it's as simple as that. You could do this tomorrow. You could take this and let's say set up a board in your community, just a whiteboard, doing the same thing. Clean pens, sanitary pens, and the other cup is for the dirty pens. Keep your masks on, physically distance, but still socially connect, and ask people, what do you love most about your community? You just have that up on a whiteboard. I know some of you probably still have farmers markets going, or just like what Ambridge did, do it in the park or a place where people gather and ask them that question and see what people say and take pictures of it. You could do something like that and put it on social media. Hollowell is eclectic. Great. Put it on social media and share it on Facebook and ask others to do the same. You can also do the one-on-one interviews. You can stay safe by staying 6 feet apart. I've seen some communities do it. They call them driveway chats. You could use Zoom. In Upper Chichester, they called them Chi Chats. And they used Zoom as doing some story circle groups and doing some community conversations with them. But what's also fun when you do these one-on-one interviews is to say, can we get people from different walks of life to talk to each other? In the one photograph, you can see someone who is young interviewing a senior. And what stories would that senior be telling that youth that perhaps they never heard before about their community? It's amazing what that can come out of this. And with story listening is where you're going to be pulling the nuggets of information out of there. And trust me, there's a ton in there. The great author Brené Brown once wrote, "What if stories are just data with soul?" I love that because that's what we see in Heart and Soul. So, what happens when you start digging out the information and sharing the information in the community? Amazing things. In this community, this is Mount Holly Springs, Pennsylvania, they discovered a historic asset that was hiding in plain sight. Now, one of the members of the Heart and Soul team, which is what you would form in phase one, and it can just be a core group of people who are really excited about this, and then it grows from there. Well, one of the team members had gone to the pharmacy and was chatting up with the pharmacist, and he had said, I know you're doing this Heart and Soul thing. Have you talked to the Gumby sisters? And I said, no, I don't know who they are. Oh, they've lived in this community for a very long time. I think, in fact, for generations. You should talk to them. So this team member asked the pharmacist, who would they know? Who's a good friend of theirs? They got with that person to make the introduction and to help make them feel like this is a trusted conversation. And they gave them all kinds of wonderful information. But the most important was they found out that their grandfather, and you can see the Gumby sisters right there, it's Harriet and Edna, their grandfather actually was a runaway slave on the Underground Railroad. And that Mount Holly Springs was a place of safe harbor on the Underground Railroad. Well, when he got to freedom, he decided he was going to join up with the Union Army, which he did, and he fought. After the war was over, he settled in Mount Holly Springs, and about circa 1870s, he built this church. It's an AME Zionist church, and there's not many of them standing in this country, which is what makes it a great historic find. It was an operating church, and he was a pastor, and then his son, the Gumby sisters' dad, was a pastor, and then they started taking over as well. But for whatever the reasons were, in 1977, the doors closed. And that people didn't even know it was there. The vines covered the church, the leaves took over, and it became that asset that was hidden. Well, when they heard the story, the team decided to go and visit the church with the sisters. When they opened the doors, it was incredible. It was like time had stood still. The hymnals were all there, the pews were there, the piano and the organ were all still there. Even the Sunday school lessons were all still stuffed in the pews, even the chairs on the top of the altar. And they knew that they had this beautiful historic asset. They let the town know, and the town took action. Someone had gotten one of these storage pods that you can see in the photograph, and people had to take things out of the church because these were now historic assets. They cataloged them and they wanted to keep them safe and preserved. And they also made sure that both the organ and the piano, as you can also see here, was very carefully moved. There had been a hole in the roof of that church, and snow and rain and all the elements were starting to come in. So they knew they had to act, and they had to act fast. But the whole community got involved with this. And as a result, they had a sense of pride. They also discovered that there was a cemetery connected to the church, and it was predominantly an African American cemetery, and it was very old. And only the headstones were for those who had fought in a war, that were a veteran. And their grandfather did have a headstone indicating that he had fought in the Civil War, but not many others. So the historic preservation students over at Dickinson College, and even as far away as University of Pennsylvania, came with sonar equipment and started mapping out the various graves that were there, and then started to try to catalog and identify who was there, so that when their ancestors came, because this was a stop on the Underground Railroad, they could figure out what had happened to perhaps their great-great-grandmother or grandfather. And it became that wonderful connection for all of them, and an appreciation for their heritage and their history of Mount Holly Springs. And it also became that historic asset. is on the register in Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Historic and Museum Commission came. They actually declared it as one of the 5 most endangered assets in the Commonwealth. And once ownership of the church was established, which it came to be for the borough, they had to step in and say, we will take ownership of this. It's now being nominated for the National Register for Historic Places, and it's right now in the hands of the Parks Department. So we're hoping to hear any time now that it will be on the National Register. And it was an asset hiding in plain sight. What it took was a story. It took listening to that story, and it took sharing that story. And magic can happen. So what happens when you've got all of this great information and these nuggets that you've pulled out? Well, this is where you start to create your heart and soul statements. This is also part of the phase 2, the connection. And it is basically articulating what people said. And what you do is you bring the people in and look at the data, look at all those nuggets, and they start realizing what kind of wonderful assets they have in their community. And they together help craft these heart and soul statements, which become your guideposts. This is now, as you lead into the next section, what you're going to say. This is the things in our community that unite us, that we treasure, and that we will build on for our future. In Idaho, in Victor, Idaho, the city council actually took these heart and soul statements, abbreviated them, and taped them to the council table where they sit when they're in session. And it's right in front of their microphone, so as they lean forward to speak into their microphone, they actually see these heart and soul statements as a reminder to them that this is what the people told them mattered to them. I love it. All right, now we're going into phase 3, and this is about planning. Okay, so you've gotten these heart and soul statements. Now what? Now you can have community conversations around them. Because remember, we said one of the things you're going to be pulling out of those stories is their hopes and concerns, and oftentimes ideas for action. So as you start pulling these things out, you start talking about these ideas for action. And you can have community conversations. I love it. In Meadville, they had Meadville Mondays. In Williamsport, they had Williamsport Wednesdays. So it is something that you can do even still today with the pandemic. As I said, Upper Chichester had Chai Chats. They invited people to come onto Zoom and people's faces all around the screen, and they were talking about their heart and soul statements and ideas for actions to uphold those statements. What can they do? And through that, because remember, you're involving everybody, and what do I say? The more you touch it, the more you're going to own it. People were owning these ideas. They loved them. They felt heard. Many of them, the hidden and missing voices that you're seeking out. And now they feel like, my voice actually does mean something here. And I also know how to get my ideas across. Okay, how about what happens with these ideas? Well, in Laconia, New Hampshire, they started renovating an old theater. There was one of these big story gathering events that they put together. It was 150 people that came to the Belknap Tower, and they divided them into small circles, 8 to 10 people. And they were asking them various questions and asking them for ideas for action. And universally, amongst all of them, all these tables, they mentioned the Colonial Theater, a beautiful old opera house that stood abandoned and boarded up. And then as they shared those with the community was saying, yeah, we all feel the same way. And people started taking action. They started GoFundMe accounts. They started seeking out and writing grants. This turned into a $12 million renovation project that even the city said, all right, we're going to throw some of our weight in on it too. And the theater is in the process of getting renovated, and the building itself is going to become a mixed-use property. But the people are owning it. There's a sense of pride in what it is that they're doing and restoring this beautiful asset to them. So at the end of phase 3, as you're going into phase 4, you're going to have an action plan. And it can be however you want it to be, a 1-year, 2-year, and it's made up of the different organizations and the different voices in your community. But you go out there and you say, all right, now we need to steward this along the way. And many times you create a stewardship team. Let me tell you about Gardner, Maine. Well, they had these various community conversations and came up with an action plan that had initially 10 items on it. But they knew some of these were pretty big and pretty broad. So they actually narrowed it down to 8, one of which was Waterfront Concerts. There was a piece of vacant land right by the river that ran through Gardner, and people wanted concerts there. Well, the mayor, who, oh, by the way, loved Heart and Soul, but had to be honest and said the city doesn't have any money in the budget for something like this. And we can't be the ones to do this. Well, there was a person in the audience. He was from a Rotary Club. He stood up and he said, Rotary does a lot of civic projects, and what if we were to, put in the benches, build the picnic tables? And suddenly the community was energized. They put together the bandstand. There were electricians there that put in the electrical boxes, the lighting, all of it, as you can see in there. And yes, they were having concerts out there, and all it cost the city was the electricity for the event itself. So these kinds of public-private partnerships can be formed if people feel like their voices matter and that their ideas count and that they can be a part of implementing it. It really makes a difference. Now, the other thing that can happen is it's an amazing amount of new volunteers and even new leaders emerge because they're hiding in plain sight, just like that church. Let me introduce you to Star Poole. Star's the one holding the newspaper. And she didn't do much volunteering, maybe a little bit at her church, because, well, quite frankly, she is a single mom of 5 kids. And she lives in a neighborhood where there isn't a great deal of access to transportation. Well, she did, however, see the Heart and Soul team had wanted to do a block party in her neighborhood, and she decided to help. She even had to talk some of her neighbors into coming out because, who are these people and what are they doing? So sometimes you need that trusted voice in there to help gain people's attention and let them know that this is actually going to be for their benefit as well as the community's. They had a wonderful time at these block parties. They did several of them. And she started to get more and more involved. Well, at these community conversations and at a summit talking about all these great ideas, she just had to be there. Well, it was at a time when buses weren't running, so she and her 5 kids walked 3 miles one way just so that they could be there. She was that excited about the future for her community. She also decided that her voice really did matter. And she had a voice, and she had good ideas. So she joined the Heart and Soul team and got even more confidence and realized, yes, I can do this. So last November, she decided to run and successfully did win her seat on the school board there in Williamsport. So very proud of her. It's amazing some of the things that can happen. All right. Now, you've heard enough from me. It's time for my colleague Jane to let you know some of her insights and stories about Community Heart and Soul. Take it away, Jane.
Thank you, Leanne. As you've heard from Leanne, there are many ways that Heart and Soul transforms our communities. We found at least 5 recurring outcomes. And the story of Star that you just heard is a great example of how we have found new leaders in our communities. By listening and sharing stories from one part of town to another part of town, we find that we have a lot more in common than we thought, and trust is built. When residents and business owners realize the support that they have for their community members and from their community members for the downtown, the support is turned into action and downtowns are re-energized. And the examples that Leanne gave about the history and culture being honored and the pride being restored, you've heard throughout Leanne's presentation. Leanne also shared the 3 principles of Heart and Soul and the 4 Heart and Soul phases, and many examples of results and successes. Heart and Soul is a field-tested model over 20 years in the making and thoughtfully designed and tested in small cities and towns across the country. But what have been some of the motivations for taking on Heart and Soul and adopting this practice in the first case? I've worked with dozens of Heart and Soul communities over the past 12 years, and I've seen the benefits firsthand. Many towns begin Heart and Soul because they want to reach a wider spectrum of their community while working on their town plans. Others are concerned about the numbers of people that are running for office or volunteering for local boards and committees, and they know they need to find new volunteers. Some want to articulate a common vision for their economic and community development goals, and they want it to come from the community rather than top down. Many communities want to find new ways to involve youth and younger people and engage them in the future. Some see a lack of energy or enthusiasm, and they seek a resurgence of pride and community mindedness. And most importantly, in my mind, communities want to make decisions differently. So our elected leaders have the confidence that they have the direction from the people who live in the community, not just the few or the loudest voices in the room. Heart and Soul is an action across the United States, in 19 states and almost 100 communities. You can go to our website and read success stories from all of our communities and click on a map and download this success sheet. I want to tell you more about Bucksport, Maine. It's a community along the coast of Maine. If you know Maine, it's north of Camden and south of Bar Harbor. It's a town of almost 5,000 people. For 84 years, the main employer was the paper mill. This closed in 2014, and when it closed, the town lost their 40% of their tax base. Over 500 people lost their jobs, and more than half of them were residents of Bucksport. But the townspeople were not to be defeated. They began the Heart and Soul program, determined to focus on the future and to engage the community in the process. Throughout the process, they collected stories from hundreds of community members. The team members held block parties in different neighborhoods around the community to get ideas from people that hadn't been listened to before. They went to the fire station, the Rod and Gun Club, school parking lots, and other gathering places to listen. And the team represented people from across the community. The town leaders were engaged and supportive. As a result, they adopted and developed and adopted 9 Heart and Soul statements to guide their future. These are posted in the town council meeting room so the elected leaders and the residents can reflect on these and guide them throughout their discussions and decision making. This is an example of how decision making changes. Through their story gathering, the team heard dozens of ideas for action, as well as what matters most to the community. And they turned this into a draft action plan with 82 ideas for action. They gathered commitments from organizations to host or lead these actions. And then they held a volunteer fair and summit with the many organizations in the community. Here they showcased the ideas and welcomed new volunteers who wanted to help. Remember, these ideas came from the people through their stories that were collected during phase 2. And then turned into lasting change, new volunteers, new leaders, and lots of community pride. I want to share a few examples from the community of their ideas for action. They wanted to see some downtown beautification, so they had Adopt a Barrel program, and all of the barrels were adopted on the night of this event. They wanted to expand Cleanup Day, which went from a few dozen volunteers one year to hundreds of volunteers the next year. They saw new businesses come to town and new enthusiasm in the community and increased pride. Another idea was to enhance the trail system along the waterfront with a story walk and exercise stations. This was adopted by the library and was great fun for people of all ages. Another idea was to continue to hold block parties that started when they were gathering stories. The neighborhoods had never done this before, and they loved getting to know each other. And even though this is a rural community, they continue to hold them in the school parking lots, at the Rod and Gun Club, and other gathering places. And they're also working to establish a year-round farmers market. They realized that they didn't have a dependable or frequent bus service, And so the Healthy Communities Coalition adopted the idea of expanding the bus service and taxi service to more than once a week to provide an alternative for non-drivers or people without vehicles. So as you can see, so many of these ideas came from the community and were proposed by residents, adopted by volunteers, and stewarded by different organizations. But some were also adopted by the town government because government realized they had a role in this too, and they were very supportive. They said, we'll be in charge of this project, and maybe we'll do it with another organization in a public-private collaboration. These included building a playground along the waterfront, creating a welcome packet for residents, and developing more trail systems, to name a few. So Bucksport's now continuing with phase 4, which is long lasting. When COVID hit in the early winter, the community came together to provide meal cards for people who lost their jobs and to support local businesses with a Bucks Buck program. These were paid for with rainy day funds from the city coffers as well as donations from the community, and including a large donation from a Bucksport native who still had ties to the community. This demonstrated the resilience and the proactiveness that was created during Heart and Soul. And in the Bucks Buck program, every $10 is worth $20 at a local business. The Heart and Soul connections to continue even during these times of masks and physical distance. The team members have gone back to the community to check in, to interview folks again, to connect, and to continue to build deeper relationships, and asking them what matters to you these days. They've posted and shared these short clips on their Heart and Soul Facebook page, further bringing the community together. So these are just a few stories about Heart and Soul towns across the U.S., and there are so many more. Community Heart and Soul builds stronger and healthier, more economically vibrant cities and towns. And it's a resident-driven model that helps build trust while respecting the unique character of the town and the deep emotional connections that we have. It's the town's heart and soul. We hope you've noticed that most of what you've seen on our slides showcase people. That's because Heart and Soul is all about the people who make up the town. And the people who make up the town are responsible for their town's future. Their stories matter, their hopes matter, their involvement matters. We want to ask you, what are your hopes for the future? Do these stories resonate? What kinds of things do you want to see in your community? Why would you want to begin Heart and Soul? We hope you do. Leanne?
Hi, Jane. Yes, hi. So, all right. Thank you so much for joining us today. We do know that you probably have some questions, and if you do, we would invite you to contact us directly, and that would be at info@communityheartandsoul.org. Just spell it all out, info@communityheartandsoul.org. So as you have your questions, please contact us directly, and we'll be very happy to answer your questions today. So, yes, I want to point out a couple of other quick things, that we have our website, we have our Facebook page, which we really hope that you will like, you will follow, and if you really do like that, then ask your friends to follow us too. If you like some of these stories and these ideas, our Facebook page is going to just deliver like crazy. We keep in touch with all of our active Heart and Soul communities, and we put all that information on there. And the final thing is the Getting Started Community Workbook. We have a live link to that, and even though this is a recording, you can still get it and download it and share it throughout your community. So if this is something that you think really is going to be important to you, well, the other thing that we would invite you to do is to continue on this journey with us. We have the next 4 Tuesdays, the same time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and we have a variety of topics here. We have the 4 elements of readiness. That means, how do you know if your community is ready to launch a Heart and Soul? And really, your community probably is ready. You just need to know where you might need to lean in one way or the other. On the 13th, we have the Who Lives, Works, and Plays in Your Community exercise, something that you saw me do earlier in the presentation. Well, we're going to take you through the whole thing. And finally, we also have October 20th, spreading the word about heart and soul in your community. How do you talk about it? How do you get the word out? How do you create the buzz? Finally, October the 27th, community investment in heart and soul. We know that that is often the question. What does it cost? Well, to do heart and soul, it doesn't cost you anything. Just want to make that clear. We don't charge to do this. So there are other costs. We'll be talking about it on the 27th, and you can learn all about how you're investing both cash, time, and in kind to create a wonderful heart and soul in your community, adopt the practice of heart and soul, and so forth. So Jane, any last thoughts before we leave everyone?
Oh, thank you, Leanne. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We hope to talk to you soon.
Don't forget, contact us at info@communityheartandsoul.org. We hope to see you again on October the 6th. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.